So we're looking at day 2 of Piecewise. We're going to, like I said before, we're going to start with a couple more examples off of our notes from day 1 yesterday, and then talk about a problem or two here on the Piecewise functions packet that you got today with a little time to work. So we're going to flip your notes from yesterday over. We're going to be looking at number 16 and number 18. And we spoke a little bit yesterday, actually, that there's 3 ways you could do these. You can bust out your pencil that may have not seen the light of day since grade school. If you just want to graph the lines and erase the part you don't need, that's one option. We talked about another option being the calculator and using the table function. And we're going to do that on number 16. And then we also spoke about you making your own little chart, just using your noggin to do it. We're going to do that on number 18 because the calculator and the little chart tend to be what a majority of you are working towards. Now, if you're still doing the erase thing, that's fine. You can still do that. But otherwise, kind of just watch these two and try to find a way that's going to work best for you. But there's still a lot of pieces to these, so we got to kind of work with them a piece at a time. So here's what we're looking at. Everything with Piecewise questions always starts there with my, as the word goes right out of my brain, inequality. That's the word we were looking for. Because that's going to tell me 3 things about this graph. First thing it's going to tell me is where that particular line starts. This one's going to start at x equals 1. Okay? We mentioned yesterday that does not mean you start here. The x value is going to be 1. We still got to figure out what y is going to be. It also tells me, the inequality arrow, if it's or equal to, like this one with the little line underneath, that's going to be a closed dot on that point. So that's 2 things. Well, I thought you said there were 3. There is. There's one more. I've got to figure out, besides 1, what other couple of values I want to use. So I look at my inequality and it says x is less than or equal to 1. And I'd mentioned yesterday, some of you may want to draw a number line on the top of your paper or, a note sheet or something. Because then you're like, okay, here I am at 1. I want x values that are less than this. So less than goes to the left. So I'd say 0 and negative 1 would be the next 2 x values that I'd be using. So now that I've got a little bit of an idea on what this is going to look like, now I would go to the calculator if that's my option. So I pull out my calculator. I go to y equals. I clear out anything that might be there. And I type in my expression, which is just 2x this time. Once I have that, I'm going to hit second graph because I want to see the table of values. Because I know what x values I want to use already. I just got to know what the y values are. So I get to x equals 1, and I see that the y value is 2. So 1, 2, with a closed-in dot. A little bit bigger than my normal dot would be. Then I go to where x equals 0. Okay, x equals 0, y also equals 0. 0, 0. And then finally, negative 1 for x, I get the y value at negative 2. So negative 1, negative 2. I go back to my starting dot and connect the dots. First inequality done. And then I just start the process over for the second one. Now, do you have to, when you're doing it on your own assignment, do you have to write all that? Do you have to write start x equals negative 1? No, but if you write it on the note sheet, at least you got a reference to go, oh yeah, that's what I'm doing. Okay, so I'm starting at 1. This time, x is greater than 1 when the arrow eats x. If I start at 1 and x is greater, I'm going to the right to 2 and 3. So I go back to y equals, because I have a new expression, clear that out. If there are fractions, okay, you need to use parentheses. So you could use the decimal form of that. You could use 0.5. But if you're going to do 1/2, you've got to make sure it's in parentheses. Once I have it in, I make sure I typed it in right. Second graph. And again, I'm going to be starting where x equals 1. I look over, y is 2.5. So it's going to be a little above the other one. And sometimes they may even be right on top of each other. That's okay. So there's my 1. I go down to x equals 2, and I see the y value is 3. And then I go to my x value of 3 and see that the y value is 3.5. Start back at my first dot, the open one. Connect the dots, and my piecewise function is done. So with the calculator, I still got to figure out a few things. Where does it start? Is the dot open or closed? And which numbers am I going to use? But again, it's not bad. And the chart method isn't going to be much different, just that we're not going to mess around with the calculator at all. Because maybe we don't have one of those available to us all the time, and that's okay. So I come down to 18. And like I said, a lot of this is going to be similar. I take a look at this first one, and I go, okay, I'm going to be starting at 2. So this time, I'm going to make myself a little chart here, a little XY chart. I'm starting at 2, so 2 goes in the first X box. But again, I got to figure out what those other 2 X values are going to be that I'm going to use. X is less than 2. Open circle, it's not or equal to. That's the only time we use a closed dot. So what are my other 2 values going to be if x needs to be less than 2? 1 and 0. So once I have those, now to get y, remember, f of x is a fancy way of saying y equals. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to plug these values in for x in this first expression. So 2 minus 3 is negative 1. 1 minus 3 is negative 2. And 0 minus 3 is negative 3. Those are my 3 coordinates that I'm going to use. Those are 3 points that I'm going to plot. So I go down to my graph, and I go, okay, so 2, negative 1, open circle. 1, negative 2, just a dot. And 0, negative 3, just a dot. Go back to my open circle, connect the dots. So you're like, that is kind of the same as what we just did. We're just figuring out the y values. It's true. And I do the same thing for my second one. Make my chart. Starting at 2, whatever that value is in the inequality is where I'm starting. Now, do they have to be the same every time? No. No, they don't. Greater than or equal to 2. Close dot, because it's or equal to. And since it's greater than, what are my other 2 values going to be? 3 and 4. So just like before, x values go in. 1 minus 2, negative 1. 1 minus 3, negative 2. And if there's some of these with the whole positive negative you're not comfortable with, you could do that part of a calculator. 1 minus 4 is negative 3. And I go back and I do my graphing. So I go to do 2, negative 1, and I'm like, wait a minute, there's already an open circle there. But now this says closed, so what do? Closed always trumps open. So if it's open and you want the same dot, you just fill it in. 3, negative 2. 4, negative 3. Start the big dot. Connect the dots. Those are probably, for most of you, don't you wish it was time to go already? That is going to be your, probably the most easy and visual ways that you can do these. Now, there is one other thing on the worksheet for today that I want to take a look at too, just so we can kind of see it again. Because we did a little bit of talk yesterday about this whole writing a piecewise function if you have the graph. Well, I think we need to do that over here. So on the piecewise functions packet that you got today, we're going to flip to the back. except Mr. H grabbed one that was already done. So hang on just a second here. Let's try that again. There's blank. Okay. First thing we're going to do is we're going to cross off 10 and 11. Those are a couple things we have not dealt with yet, so we don't need to deal with them right now. But we're going to go ahead and we're going to do number 9. Number 9's a little weird in that we've got 3 lines, or 2 rays in a segment, not 3. So 1, 2, 3 segments means I'm going to have 1, 2, 3 if statements. And like we were talking about yesterday, the line and the dot are going to tell me everything. So we're going to start with this one here to the left. So here's the first thing I can remind you of. We talked about this before. Check out where direction the arrow is going. The arrow is going left. So left equals less than. So when I'm writing my inequality, one thing I notice right away is that my arrow will be pointing at x for that one, because that's how we signify less than. The dot will tell me the other information that I need. Filled in dot means it's or equal to. And then wherever that dot comes back to the x-axis, whatever the x value is there, is the value that's going to go with my inequality. And that'll be true for all 3 of these, but we'll come back to those in a second. We're going to finish this one. When I look at this now, I go, okay, I need to know the slope, and I need to know the y-intercept. Well, I notice, here's my y-axis. This doesn't even cross it, so we're going to have to deal with that in a minute. But we can figure out the graphing part. So I'm going to zoom in a little more here, just so it's a little bit easier to see some things. I need to find one other dot on this line that goes through those crosshair things like we talked about yesterday. And I find one pretty quick. So my slope then is just to count from one point to the other. So my rise, I go up 1, that's positive, and right 1. So I've got that part. What about that pesky y-intercept here? Now that I know what the pattern is, the slope is, I can just follow that until I get there. So up 1, right 1. Up 1, right 1. I'm on the y-axis. 1, 2. And I get my value. So there's pieces. I break it up into little pieces and keep finding the individual parts. And I'm going to do that same thing. I'm going to jump to this guy next. I'm going to save him for last because he's special. So I look here, and I notice my arrow's heading off to the right. Right is going to be greater than. Greater than's when the arrow eats x. So just like I did before, look at the dot. It's closed. So it's or equal to. Where is that dot in regards to the x-axis? Positive 1. And now I got to find my slope and my y-intercept again. And I'm in the same bind I was on the first one. Doesn't cross the y-axis. We'll figure that out in a minute. Find my second point that goes through the crosshairs. Up 1, right 1. Now this time I got to do something a little different, because if I keep going up 1 and right 1, I'm getting further and further away from the y-axis. That's not helping me. So instead of up and right, I'm going to do the double opposite. I'm going to go down and left. Now I'm on the y-axis, and I had to go up 1 to get there. So Again, baby steps I'm finding these. So then I get to the last one. Now this is going to be weird because I have two end values now. So anytime you run into that situation, here's what this is going to look like. I'm going to stick X in the middle, and I'm going to have two arrows both heading left, and I'll explain to you why they both got to go left here in just a second. I'm going to find the furthest point left, open circle, so I don't put a line under, X values at -1. Then I go furthest to the right, open circle, stays just as this, down to the 1. So here's why I do it that way. I want to go left to right, like I would normally with my domain, least to greatest. And if you look at these individually, X is greater than -1, so I'd be going to the right from here. X is less than +1, I'd be going to the left. And that's how I get this one where they crash in the middle. But one positive thing, this time I actually have a y-intercept. 1, 2, 3. And I go up 1, right 1 with my slope. And I'm set. That one was a little wild. The only other thing then that I'm going to mention back here, because I think number 8 you're probably going to be in pretty good shape, especially if you keep your notes out while you're doing this. But on number 7, I had some questions earlier today, and people were like, well, hey, is that all one line? Because I don't see any dots anywhere. I don't see any circles. They are both sharing a circle here right at the origin. Okay, so I've got one line with an inequality I'm going to have to deal with there, and one line with an inequality that I'm going to be dealing with out here. So there's still going to be 2. So between the example we've got in 9 and the example that we did yesterday, kind of use those and try and figure them out that same way. So I'm going to step out of the way. Let me say one thing that I normally do. Using the notes, the examples, try them, check them. And if it's going good, super. If it's not going well, if things are still mixed up, come and talk to me. But have something on the paper. Okay? Don't come up with nothing. Nothing doesn't get us by anywhere. And then tomorrow we're going to be moving into absolute values. So be on top of this. Use your work time well and ask some questions.